Injustice 2 is the 2017 sequel to Injustice: Gods Among Us, made by NetherRealm Studios, the same team behind the newest generation of Mortal Kombat games. Seeing as how Mortal Kombat 11 came out in April of 2019, we would typically be seeing news related to NetherRealm's next game by this time of the year, but so far we've heard nothing from the studio. And with the rumors of NetherRealm's game maybe not even being Injustice 3, it looks like we might be waiting longer than we thought to play the next iteration of the series. Even though Injustice 2 no longer gets new content, the community is still full of people playing and leveling up their fighters to duke it out as their favorite superpowered beings. So with all this said, is Injustice 2 still worth your time in 2021? So starting off with the gameplay of Injustice 2, what makes it different from other fighting games you could be playing? Well, for starters, the roster adds a lot of variety to what each character is able to do. You've got the typical DC roster of the entire Justice League, the Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Green Arrow, and so on. And on top of those iconic characters, there are a lot of lesser-known heroes and villains to make up the roster as well, like Atrocitus, Dr. Fate, Blue Beetle, Firestorm, Captain Cold, Swamp Thing, and that's only about half the base roster. Each hero and villain is super unique from their looks, moves, specials, and everything. And it really just makes learning each new character so much more fun, because you go from the agile sword-wielding Robin to the tanky grappler Bane, and the gameplay difference is incredible. The roster and the variety really makes the game stand out in terms of its characters, and all this isn't even mentioning the DLC characters added in after the game. Now, there are 10 post-launch characters, including the pre-order character Darkseid. The DLC characters can basically be divided into 3 categories. The first being DC characters, then Mortal Kombat characters, and the third being guest characters. Now, the DC characters they added in, oh boy, they really hit it out of the park. Those characters include Darkseid, Red Hood, Starfire, Black Manta, the Atom, and Enchantress. Many of these were fan-favorite requested characters, and NetherRealm really just absolutely brought it, making them fun and interesting to play, and just variety and uniqueness, really. The next group is the Mortal Kombat characters. Scorpion was a guest character in the first Injustice game, so it was no surprise when Sub-Zero was announced to be DLC in the first Combat Pack. Then in the second Combat Pack, we also got the addition of Raiden. Both of these characters were really sweet representations of their rated M counterparts, and really added some flair to the game that some of the DC characters were a little lacking in. Now, the last group, the guest characters, were really interesting, right? So firstly, coming from the Dark Horse comics was Hellboy, who brought some pretty cool moves, visuals, and a giant fist to the competition. The second of the guest characters was actually the last DLC character to be released for Injustice 2, and oh boy was it a doozy. Enter the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The internet went wild for this addition to the game, and they actually turned out perfect. Basically, using the gear system, which we'll talk about soon, you're able to choose which turtle you want based on which weapon you equip. All the turtles share some moves and combos between each other, but there are differences in other combos, attacks, and special moves, and on top of that, they each have their own character power, which brings us into the next part of the gameplay that makes Injustice 2 so special, the character powers. So each button corresponds to a different attack. On Xbox, the light, medium, and heavy attacks correspond to the X, Y, and A buttons respectively. The B button triggers the character power, which can do any number of things depending on the character. I'll give you some examples to show you how diverse they can be. Batman calls down 3 floating batarangs that he can manually send at his opponent or use to shield himself. Swamp Thing leaves a trail of damaging swamp mush wherever he walks for a short time. Red Hood goes into a stance that allows him to either shoot or he can start a combo from it. The Atom gets smaller, gets some new moves out of that, and is harder to hit. Bane can trigger up to 3 of his Venom tanks, which greatly boost his damage for a short time, but once they run out, he takes a little more damage for a short while. Leonardo can summon the other turtles to assist him in battle, and Green Arrow can switch out and shoot different arrows, just to name a few. Some are defensive, some are offensive, some are timed, and some can be activated at any time, but they're all unique. The diversity in these character powers and the way they're used is a huge part of what makes this game special, by ensuring that each character has a power that lets you play completely different from another character. The last thing I want to talk about that makes this game worth your time is the gear system. Now, a lot of fighting games, some of the reasons you continue to play it could be learning new characters, getting better at playing certain characters, fighting online and ranking up. But eventually, I think every fighting game fan has had that moment where they're just not super interested in playing that game anymore. They get bored, you know? Once you learn all the characters, you can play them all pretty well. Maybe the competition isn't fun for you, or maybe the servers are just so bad for that particular game that you can't even play online. So what's supposed to keep you enticed to play? Well, Injustice 2 has a very clever kind of solution for that in the gear system. Basically, every fighter has 5 different things you can customize with different looking gear pieces. Gear pieces can look different from one another, have different stats from one another. Some have augments, which can do small things like boost the amount of XP you earn or the amount of damage you take or deal from interactive objects. But it's a really cool way to make a character look different and make them feel like your own. Every character has the same things you can customize, like head, torso, arms, and legs, but each character then has a separate 5th slot that is unique to them. Things like batarangs, weapons, chest symbols for someone like Superman or Supergirl, other pieces of things that each character can change. There are also shaders, which change the color schemes of your gear, which can really change how a character looks, like having a pink Green Lantern or a blue-looking Scarecrow or a brownish Swamp Thing. Just really adds to making each character your own. So these are all some of the reasons why Injustice 2 is still worth your time in 2021. Just everything from the base roster to the DLC characters to all the special moves and the uniqueness of each character in their gear and their shaders and their character powers. It all just comes together to create a unique kind of game that you can't get anywhere else. Still 4 years later, this is still one of the only games of its kind, and it just will probably stay that way for a while, especially if Injustice 3 takes longer than we think. And so these are some of the reasons that Injustice 2 is still worth your time in 2021. That's not even mentioning something like the story mode, which is basically like a whole movie in and of itself and is really good. But let's be honest, that's not what's going to keep you playing. But thank you for listening. This is Jared signing off.
Enchantress wins.